Let's talk about contract pricing, spot pricing, freight with our good friend Kyle Lintner here at K Ratio. He's on here right now. How are you doing today, Kyle? Tell our audience a little bit about yourself, K Ratio, and what you're seeing in the freight markets.
I'm doing well. Thanks, Kevin. Mike, nice to see you as well. Guys, brief intro. I'm the managing director at K Ratio, the risk advisory firm that offers solutions for both revenue and expense risk, regardless of your category type, shipper, carrier, 3PL. To get at your question, Kevin, the one thing that's concerning me, it's a little bit similar to what Zach was saying. Yes, right now the most important markets are Harrisburg, Allentown, East Coast, and LA on the West Coast. But I think the most important thing that's happening inside of all of freight right now is contract rates are on fire and they are rapidly catching up to spot.
You had said, I believe, 15%, 10 to 15% on your Monday update that you did this week. Is that right?
Yeah, we're up year over year 14% now from Jan 20 to Jan 21, which in and of itself is a huge move. But now when you compare the contract rates to the spot rates, which I think is paramount for anyone in the industry to do, because for whatever weird reason, and we don't need to get into that today, we have two markets. We have a spot market and we have a contract market. And if we now have contract rates that are catching up to spot rates, that's going to be a big magnet for where loads go. If you're a shipper, you'd prefer all of your stuff to go contract. And now if it's going at a contracted rate that's exceeding the spot rate, well, there really isn't a reason for it to go spot. So those loads are automatically going to go contract, which frees up a lot of capacity and increases the efficiency across the entire domestic supply chain. That has serious implications for intermediaries. If you're a 3PL, the relationship between spot and contract is a major driving force between not just profitability for your company, but how much overall business you guys are going to do.
Yeah, it absolutely is it's a severely driving force right now, right? So, yeah. So, is this catch up gonna does it stick? I mean, how does it uncorrect itself if this is a correction, or let's say, how do they diverge again, right? Because they're basically converging, right? Because contract is to meet where that was elevated. So as that elevates, and then I guess who starts the ball to start bringing back down the spot rates? Because I would imagine that spot rates dropping severely would be the thing that would unwind this, right?
Right. It's a little bit of a chicken and an egg scenario here, but as contract rates move higher, and a lot of this unfortunately is anecdotal, you hear whispers of mini bids, rates on file, things like that, or even RFPs being moved up in the annual bid cycle. Those are the things that shippers need to do. Nobody wants the loss of productivity by their workforce routinely running out loads that just get rejected. When you have a load that rips through the entire routing guide, that doesn't do anybody any good. So let's just move the rate higher so we can get the stuff out the door, because it's going out the door no matter what. But now, if those rates are higher, you eliminate the need for the spot boards. Now, the truck companies that are still running spot loads from a broker, it's not going to matter to them, even if it is spot or contract. They're always conducting business with that broker as a spot load per se and at a spot price. But now, if we have loads that are going through contract, we free up some of this lost productivity by way of hours spent tendering, retendering, trying to source a truck. It's easier just to run it out through the routing guide. So I don't know if you want to call it a correction or an overcorrection or an undercorrection, but we need to have spot above contract. That's how this marketplace works. When it isn't like that, when it's out of balance and spot rates are higher, well, now we have all of these people that need to reprice and resource trucks just to get the loads out the door. Now, what's going to happen from here isn't going to happen overnight. This is an average. And on average right now, the difference between spot and contract is only 2 cents. But market by market, we'll begin to have these corrections. And I pointed out on Monday, if you look at just the biggest ones, and obviously the first one to go to for any of this stuff for me is always LA. Take a look at the LA outbound markets, and all of the primary destinations now have contract rates over spot rates, whether that's Dallas, Phoenix, Las Vegas, Stockton, Denver, Salt Lake City, you name it. If you now have a contract rate that's above your spot rate, business is going to flow pretty easily. And we're still going to have spot business because things are going to pop up and there's going to be excess volume on one day where a truck really won't make it the other day. But if the course of action is just to run it through the routing guide like everybody prefers, that's going to calm things down. And I think it's going to look more like a domino effect of price, how we saw in the past, where one market gets hot and that creates the chain reaction in rising spot rates. We're now going to see markets cool off, and that'll have the chain reaction as far as which markets go next.
Yeah, so we're talking about this. Actually, Chad Holsey from MTM says, good morning, and Marley Olivier says hi as well. So if you're a 3PL freight broker out there, and you're most of your business is in the spot market, are you going to see less volumes come through to you in the spot on spot loads?
100%.
Because it's been a gravy. It's been gravy over the last 6-9 months on the spot market. You know, spot loads are everywhere. Yeah. Are you going to see a significant downturn in volume going into 2021 from spot loads from your shippers?
Yes, immediately. And that's going to be the biggest thing that everybody notices. There's just going to be less spot volume. There's still going to be the loads that always end up going spot, the ones that are one-off, the ones where there's a day that gets pushed out in shipping, maybe there's too much volume, whatever, the things that naturally pop up. Even in 2019, when we had 3% tender rejections, that's still 3 out of 100 tenders. That stuff's going to be there. But now what we have, where there's 20 to 30% rejection on tenders, that's going to disappear immediately. And these loads are still going to be there. If we look at the OTVI, and even if we want to take an accepted tender index, there is still a massive amount of freight that's moving through the country right now. But you can tell that it's going spot or it's going contract because tender rejections are down, even though tender volume is up. And then if we just look at spot rates, they're also down. Now, they're not going to fall out of bed because the contract rates have been repriced so much higher. But now if you're running that load out and you're that shipper, you're paying 5-10 cents lower than the spot, whatever, you don't care. Those loads have to go. You want to get that rate on file. You want to get that load out the door. So if it's a contract rate that's 15% higher year over year, so be it. And that's going to keep a floor underneath spot prices, but spot loads by volume, those are going to start to dwindle rapidly.
Yeah, I was gonna bring that up. The OTRI, isn't that an indication that this normalization or this calming down of the market, as you would say, and not falling out of the routing guide is already starting to take effect, right? Because that's what that's measuring, is stuff falling out of the routing guides and hitting the spot market, putting upward pressure. That coming down is indicative of it's implicating that there's fewer volume coming out of those routing guides hitting the spot market and driving up price, right?
Right, because it's landing at primary or secondary or tertiary because the rates are now higher. We've tried to warn going back to August and September of last year about this. Get used to the scenario where volumes are high and rejections come down, but prices remain high because everything's going to get repriced higher. That's the only solution to this. Unfortunately, the freight market is very similar to an agricultural commodity where there's almost seasons and there's time that takes to bring more capacity online. We'd love to go out and just buy a truck and have it ready tomorrow, but that's not the case. And we had seriously strong orders in November and December for trucks, but those aren't showing up until summertime at best. So until then, the only way to solve the spot market crisis is to push contract rates up higher. Now, to answer your question in a much longer format, and I apologize for that, Kevin, if you're a broker and the bulk of your business is spot, that's going to go away. And if you want to keep running your business and you want to keep running loads, you're going to have to get involved in contract and you're going to have to get involved competitively.
If we look at aggregated volumes, we take the contract and the spot, put them together, overall freight volumes heading into the really second half of 2021. Do you expect any blips and a fall in overall load volumes in the second half of the year? Or do you think it's going to be a strong volume year all through?
I think overall it's a strong volume, but my personal opinion is the second half of 21 is going to look a lot different than the first half. I think from now until, call it 4th of July, it's going to be a lot like the second half of 2020. You've seen a number of retailers and businesses say it's a focus point for them this year to rebuild inventories. Obviously, there's only one way to do that, and that's to move the goods around, whether they're imported or they're coming from warehouses and DCs to stores. That's going to keep going. That's going to keep freight volumes afloat. Once that inventory rebuild is over with, now we get back into what does consumer demand look like? Obviously, that's a huge unknown, and that's the big question when none of us can predict it. But I think it's very hard to picture a scenario where the second half of 21 looks like the second half of 20 by way of U.S. consumer demand. Call it stimulus, call it working from home, whatever it is. We all bought a lot of stuff. Are we going to keep buying that same level of stuff in the second half of 21? And this is one of those weird things I've tried to point out to people. It sounds very funny to say, but if things do go back to normal and we get a return to everyday life, that's less freight moving through the network. Because if you're spending your money going on vacation, going out to eat, going to the movie theater, those service dollars soak up a lot of dollars that could be spent on tangible goods. And it's a very easy scenario to walk through. If you think about it, if you go out to a restaurant, you and your wife go out to have dinner, it costs X amount of dollars. If you spent that same amount of money at the grocery store instead, those two have very different impacts on freight, because $100 at a restaurant goes one way and $100 at the grocery store is a lot more stuff.
Absolutely, 100% right. And that mix is what mix stays there and what mix doesn't, right? As far as e-commerce, and a lot of that will keep pressure on final mile more than it will anything else, right? I mean, if you start,
and that'll do some pressure on freight too. If you think about it, if we have that shift, and now we have a different freight pattern inside the network, does this look less and less of a pull from LA? And then now we need to shift capacity away from there. That stuff doesn't happen overnight. It takes a while for the trucks to migrate, especially if they have to go all the way back over to the other side of the Mississippi, where more than half of the country lives. That takes time. And that disruption creates spot market activity, but it's not going to look anything like what we saw in July, August, or September of 2020. I don't know when we'll repeat that type of spot market volume. I won't say never, because 2020 has proven anything is possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely has. Thank you so much for your time today, Kyle. If you haven't seen Kyle on LinkedIn, his Monday updates are phenomenal. And Rhonda here in LinkedIn says, "Thank you for the quick detailed clips on LinkedIn with Sonar Graphics. I enjoy learning all this important stuff." So Rhonda appreciates it as well. And how does our audience reach out and contact you on LinkedIn or through email?
You find me on LinkedIn, or the easiest way is www.k-ratio.com.
Thank you again.
Thanks, guys.
It's always a pleasure, Kyle.
Thanks, Kyle.